Hello, welcome to NAIFA Live. I'm your host, Zach Hewells. We are excited to welcome you as we are broadcasting live from our host chapter, NAIFA, Nebraska. Thank you, Nebraska, for being our host state today. We have an incredibly exciting speaker, David McKnight, who is the author of The Power of Zero. Before I turn this over for the introduction, I have a few housekeeping items to go over. Today, we have one CE credit that has been approved for Arkansas, DC, Illinois, Iowa, Nebraska, North Dakota, Virginia, and Wisconsin. For those of you joining us virtually from those states with the intention to earn CE credit, you must remain present for the duration of the program. Throughout the program, polling questions will appear on your screen as a pop-up. You'll have 2 minutes to answer them in order to attain the CE credit. If for any reason you don't see the polling question, feel free to use the chat feature in Zoom to give your answer. In fact, the first polling questions for individual viewers is, what state are you viewing this program from? What state are you viewing this program from? Please use the polling function on your screen to respond. You have 2 minutes. Now, NAIFA Live will be held every month, so please mark your calendar for next meeting on November 21st, which will feature the Executive Director of NAIFA's Limited and Extended Care Planning Center, Carol Golden. Now, it is my pleasure to turn the program over to NAIFA Nebraska President Brad Broderson, who will introduce our speaker for today, David McKnight. Brad?
All right, thank you, Zach. Welcome, NAIFA members. NAIFA Nebraska is pleased to host the 10th in a series of monthly NAIFA Alive events. Live from Kearney, Nebraska, I'm proud and privileged to introduce our speaker today. David McKnight graduated from Brigham Young University with honors in 1997. Over the past 20 years, he has helped put thousands of Americans on the road to the 0% tax bracket. He has been featured in Forbes, USA Today, the New York Times, Fox Business, and many other leading media outlets and national publications. David was a focused speaker at the worldwide annual meeting of MDRT in Toronto, Canada, and is a multiple top-of-the-table qualifier. His best-selling book, The Power of Zero, has sold over 200,000 copies. When it launched in September of 2018, it finished the week as the #2 most sold business book in the world. In 2019, The Power of Zero was ranked as the #9 best financial resource in the country by Forbes magazine. As the president of David McKnight and Company, he mentors hundreds of financial advisors from across the country who specialize in the Power of Zero retirement approach. David and his wife, Felice, have 7 children. Please help me welcome David McKnight.
Thank you very much for that warm welcome. I assume that applause is for my wife and not for me. Brad was right. We're going to be very interactive over the course of the next hour, 15 or so. I ask a lot of questions. If you feel like you know the answer, just yell it out. You don't even need to raise your hand. So let's start with the quiz here. First question on the quiz is this. Can anybody tell me the highest tax bracket in the history of our country? What's the worst it's ever been? 90%, 75%. Anybody want to go higher than 90? Yeah, the last 2 years of World War II, the highest marginal tax bracket was 94%. And that was for any dollar you made above and beyond $200,000. Now, $200,000 was a pretty big deal back then. It was about $3.2 million in today's dollars. Can you even think of anybody back then that made that type of money? Had the Rockefellers, right? You had the Carnegies. Well, there was an actor who later became a politician. Can you think of who that was? Ronald Reagan. If you study Ronald Reagan's biography, he talks about how he never made more than 2 movies in a year. Reason being, he made about $100,000 per movie, and any dollar, $200,000, he only kept 6 cents on the dollar. Truth be told, he didn't even get to keep the 6 cents. Who do you think got the 6 cents? His wife, right? Maybe his agent, right? It actually went to the state of California to pay for state tax. So it literally did not make sense for Ronald Reagan to work past the month of June. So he would take the rest of the year off. So he'd go to his ranch, he'd ride horses, he'd start making movies again January 1st the following year. So that was a long time ago. Let's fast forward to the decade of the 70s. What was the worst federal marginal tax bracket you could pay throughout the entire decade of the 70s? Yeah, this one's easy to remember. Throughout the entire decade of the 70s, worst federal marginal tax bracket you could pay was 70%. One tax bracket you can pay today, the tax rate at which Bill Gates pays taxes on most of his earned income. Close. It's 37%. Now, here's my question for you. How does 37 add up against some of these tax rates we experienced in the past? So this is not a trick question. It's lower. That's you're actually mathematically accurate. It is lower. And it's interesting you should say that because I do this workshop all across the country. And I routinely ask rooms full of people, taxes today, and what do you think they say? Terrible, horrible, as bad as they've ever been. What's the truth? The truth is that taxes today are about as low as we've seen in our lifetime. However, something is going to happen to this tax rate. January 1st, 2026. Is it going to go up or is it going to go down? It's going to go up. What's it going to go up to? It's going to go back up to exactly what it was in 2017, 39.6. Well, is 39.6 enough to keep me awake at night? Well, 39.6 is what tax rates were throughout the entire decade of the 90s. How was the stock market doing in the 90s? Was it doing all right? How soon we forget, right? It was doing great. In fact, you drop $100,000 into the S&P 500 in 1990, take a nap for 9 years, wake up in 1999. What's that $100,000 going to be worth? About $600,000. Your money would have sextupled during the decade of the 90s alone, and that's under these kind of tax rates. So again, not enough to keep me awake at night. The real question I have for you, however, is this. What is likely to happen to tax rates as we move beyond 2026 to 2028, 2030 and beyond? What does your gut tell you? Are tax rates down the road likely to be higher or lower than 39.6? Raise your hand if you think higher. That's everybody in the room. So I'm with you. So for those of you in the room that think the tax rates down the road are likely to be higher than 39.6, my question for you is why? What will we be spending money on as a country that could literally force tax rates to go up? What are the big ticket items? Yeah, so that's the very first one. So it's the debt and the interest on the debt. By the way, how much debt do we owe? $22 trillion and change. That's 2 twos followed by 12 zeros. We owe some of that money to ourselves. We borrowed some of it from Social Security, but who else do we owe a lot of that money to? China. Yeah, I don't know if you guys realize this, but just recently, the U.S. Treasury came out with a new $100 bill. Did you guys see that? I think it's because China's got all the old ones. It's not going to get any better than that, by the way. So we got the debt, we got the interest on the debt. Medicare, defense, Social Security, infrastructure. You know, the other day I was talking to a lady. I said, hey, what happens to your pension if your company goes broke? She says, oh, don't worry. No matter what happens to my company, the federal government guarantees I will always receive 2/3 of my pension every year till I die. That's what we call an unfunded obligation. What's an unfunded obligation? It's a promise the federal government's made that they can't afford to keep. Conservative economists say that that number that they promise that they can't afford to keep is about $120 trillion. But there's actually a guy out of Boston University named Dr. Larry Kotlikoff. He's the foremost expert on what we call fiscal gap accounting. What's fiscal gap accounting? It's basically stretching out our obligations over the next 70 years and saying, how much have we promised versus what we can actually afford to deliver under today's tax rates, and then taking the net present value of that future obligation, saying, okay, how much money would we have to have sitting in a bank account today, earning Treasury rates, to be able to deliver on all these promises? And he says that the real national debt's not 120 trillion. It's not 22 trillion. He says it's at 239 trillion. That's how much we've promised that we can't afford to deliver. That's how much we'd have to have sitting in a bank account today to pay for all these promises. And the list goes on and on. But if you had to pick 2 things on this list that will make debt go up more over time than any two other things, which two would you pick? Medicare and Social Security. Let's see if we can wrap our brains around why. I'm going to open up a brief parenthesis just on Social Security alone. Who can tell me when Social Security was invented? In what year did they roll out Social Security? It was the linchpin of the New Deal. It was the hallmark of the Roosevelt administration. So it was 1935. And when Social Security first started out, how many workers were putting money into the program for every one person that took money out? What did that ratio look like? It was 42 to 1. So you had 42 workers putting money into the program for every one person that took money out. And back then, how old did you have to be to draw on Social Security? 65. And anybody want to take a stab at what the average life expectancy was back then? It was 62. They didn't even anticipate that the average person would live long enough to ever draw on Social Security. If you were lucky enough to make it to 65, how long did you draw on Social Security before you tipped over dead? Yeah, 2 years. So in summary, when Social Security first started out, you had all these people putting money in, hardly anybody taking money out. And when they took it out for 2 years and they died. Was Social Security pretty solvent when it first started out? Yes, it was set up to last forever. And then something happened. Soldiers came home from World War II and they started to do something at a rate at which they'd never done it before. What'd they start doing? Having babies. Thank you for the tasteful way in which you put that. They started to have children. In fact, if you look at demographic trends over the last 100 years or so, it looks a little bit like this. You start off at the turn of the century with what we call the Henry Ford generation. These are our World War II vets. What did Tom Brokaw call these folks? The greatest generation. They were followed up by what we call the silent generation, still sort of reeling from the Great Depression. And then what do we call this big statistical anomaly right here? Yeah, so these are baby boomers, okay? Now, as it turns out, my was one of the very first baby boomers. She was born January 17th, 1946. 64. So we had 18 years of unprecedented procreation. How many baby boomers do we have in our country today? A lot. Thank you for being so specific. We've got about 78 million baby boomers. It's about 25% of our country. It's the single largest voting bloc in our country. Now, did baby boomers have a few children of their own? They had a few. Problem is, they had 30 million fewer, okay? We call this Generation X. I am a Generation X. And then we had children of our own. We call this Generation Y. Which is exactly what I asked myself in the middle of the night. Now, as you look at this chart, did baby boomers, these folks right here, have nearly as many children as their parents did? No, they had almost 30 million. Like I said, they had almost 30 million fewer children. So if you were to ask yourself today, how many workers are putting money into Social Security for every one person that takes money out? What does that ratio look like today? It's a little bit less than 3 to 1. It's like 2.7 to 1. In another 10 years, what's that going to look like? 2 to 1. And what's the earliest you can draw on Social Security today? 62. And if you start drawing at 62, how long will you continue to draw before you tip over dead? Yeah, you know, a lot of times when we think about life expectancy in our country, the number 77 or 78 pops up, which actually is average life expectancy, but that includes infant mortality and all the bad things that can happen to you up until the age 62. The truth is that if you make it to 62 and start drawing on Social Security, you will continue to draw on Social Security on average until age 85. Is Social Security today just a little bit different than when it first started out? Yeah, it started off as insurance against living too long, and it slowly morphed into a pension program that covers us for nearly a quarter of our lives. How many of you guys have ever heard of a guy named David Walker? Does that name ring a bell at all? David Walker? So David Walker is what we call the Comptroller General of the federal government. He did that for 10 years under Bush and Clinton. So he's very centrist, tell it like it is sort of a guy. He was the head of the Government Accountability Office. He was on the board of Social Security. He was basically the CPA of the USA. The reason I tell you this is because David Walker knows more about these numbers than just about anyone else on the planet. And he took one look at the books and he said, hey, we have promised way more than we can afford to deliver. He says, you think Social Security is bad. He says, Medicare is 5 times more expensive. He said, to be able to deliver on these 2 promises alone, he said this in 2008, he said tax rates would have to double tax rates. But for every year that you postpone doubling taxes, the national debt will grow on average by about $2 trillion per year, each and every year, till we hit this magical moment in our country when we have $53 trillion of debt. So here's my question for you. What's wrong with a country that has $53 trillion of debt? Yeah, did you know that if we had $53 trillion of debt, that all of the revenue flowing into the U.S. Treasury at that point under today's tax rates would only be enough to pay the interest on all that debt, let alone any principal, let alone a single dollar for Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, or anything else we listed on the screen. David Walker was so concerned about this that in 2008 he resigned and started to crisscross the country, raising the warning cry to whoever would listen. And in 2010, he wrote a book called Come Back America, in which he diagnosed the problem. And he appeared on NPR to talk about his book. And he told the radio show hostess, he says, hey, look, tax rates have to double or we're going to go broke. And she didn't believe him. So he says, hey, look, I can give you one 4-letter word that explains why tax rates have to double, and she couldn't guess what it was, so they opened up the phone lines and people started to call in. And they got all sorts of interesting guesses. The number one guess was debt. Then they had wars and kids and fear and jobs. There was one guy who called in and even said health. And I was like, H-E, no, that's not gonna work. Does anybody know the 4-letter word that explains why tax rates have to double? Math, that's exactly right. Math is a 4-letter word that explains why tax rates have to double. What does David Walker mean by math? Well, basically what he's saying, look, if this is what you're spending and this is what's coming in, you either have to double what's coming in, cut in half what's going out, or some combination of the two. It's a simple mathematical equation. I remember I was given the same presentation 2 days before midterm elections in 2009 in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin. And when I was done, everyone came up to me. They said, Dave, who should we vote for? Who should we vote for? And I never felt so powerful. And I said, you know what? It doesn't matter who you vote for, because whoever gets elected is going to inherit a math problem, the solution to which involves either doubling taxes, reducing spending by half, or some combination of the two. All right, let's get serious, folks. How many of you guys watch cartoons? I know Dave does, and a couple of you guys. Okay. How many of you guys have ever watched a cartoon? Okay. How many of you guys have seen The Roadrunner? Yeah, some of you guys were weaned on The Roadrunner, right? Well, a couple years ago, I was watching The Roadrunner. I was with my children. And in this particular episode, the coyote was trying to kill the Roadrunner. And he was building a bomb with which to do so. And what company makes his bombs? Acme. Now we're cooking. All right. So he's building a bomb made by Acme inside a shed that was also made by Acme. And he was so focused and intent on finishing this bomb that he didn't realize that the Roadrunner had pushed his shed onto a train track. Maybe you've seen the episode. And he was so focused and intent on finishing this bomb that he also didn't realize until the last possible moment that there was a huge freight train bearing down on him. And a very important question. Most important question I'm going to ask today. If you found yourselves on a train track with a huge freight train bearing down on you, what would you do? You'd run. You get off the track. You haul yourself to safety. It's interesting you should say that. I came across this little blurb in the USA Today. This happened a couple years ago out in Utah. It says, a man from far west managed to bail out of his car that was stuck on a railroad track before the vehicle was struck by a commuter train at 55 miles per hour. Danny Olson, 62, said he took a wrong turn and got his 98 Nissan Sentra stuck between the rails Monday evening. This is the important part. I want you to pay attention. When he saw the train lights approaching in his rear view mirror, ready for this? He decided to get out of the car. Good move. Saved his life. Let's go back to the coyote. The coyote sees this huge freight train bearing down on him, and instead of jumping out of the way, what does he do? He simply pulls down the window shade, thinking that the act of doing so would make the problem go away. Did the problem go away? No, there's a huge explosion. And does the coyote ever really die? No, it's frustrating, right? But as the smoke and fire cleared away, you could see him sort of limping off screen, very much the worse for wear. Pardon me. Well, why do we gather here today to talk about the Roadrunner? Well, as Americans who do most of our saving for retirement and what we call tax-deferred vehicles like 401ks and IRAs, we have a very real freight train that's bearing down on us. And it's bearing down on us in the form of what? Higher taxes. And we got a couple of choices of what we can do about it. We can pretend like the problem doesn't really exist. We can pretend like the math to which David Walker referred doesn't really add up. But isn't that a little bit like pulling down the window shade? Or we can implement some strategies starting this year that can help remove our clients from the train tracks, thereby insulating and buffering them from the impact of higher taxes. So what we're going to do in the balance of our time is we're going to talk about some of those strategies that we can use starting this year to get our clients off the tracks. Thank you. Now, as you know, there's all sorts of different ways to save money for retirement. There's literally millions of different types of investments out there, but I'm here to tell you that no matter where you invest your money, all of those investments basically fit into only 3 types of accounts. How's that for easy? There's only 3 basic types of accounts within which to save money, and today we're going to talk about these accounts in terms of buckets of money. First bucket we're going to talk about is what we call the taxable bucket, meaning every year as your money grows, you get to pay a tax. Who can give me some examples of some taxable investments? Savings, mutual funds, stocks, bonds, CDs. You guys get the idea. How can you tell if you have a taxable event, How can you tell if you have a taxable investment? That's right. Every year at the end of the year, the financial institution sends you that little love letter. It's called a 1099. It says, hey, your money grew this much. Now you got to give a portion of that growth back to the IRS in the form of taxes. So the 1099 is the tip-off. So generally speaking, the growth on the money in this bucket is 100% taxable. Well, if that's the case, why do we even have these types of investments? We have them because generally speaking, they can be very liquid. What does liquid mean? You can convert it to cash. You can get your hands. Means that it makes for great emergency funds. What do financial experts tell us about how much money we should have in emergency funds? What have you heard? 6 months were the basic living expenses. That's like the one thing they can actually agree upon. Having said that, can you have too much money in this bucket? Yeah, we see it all the time. We see the couple who lived through the Depression. They shuffle into my office and they say, Dave, we got 9 CDs for $100,000 each in 9 different banks. And we think we may be paying too much in tax. Are they paying too much in tax? Yes, because you can have too much money in this bucket. So what's the moral of the story, folks, when it comes to the taxable bucket? The moral of the story is this. You can have too much money in this bucket from a tax efficiency perspective, but you can have not enough from an emergency fund perspective. So what we're looking for in this bucket is just the right amount. And just the right amount is 6 months worth of basic living expenses. Second bucket. Second bucket is what we call the tax-deferred bucket. That's right. Meaning you don't pay your tax as your money grows. When do you pay your tax? At the very end, when you take the money out. Who can give me some examples of some typical tax-deferred investments? 401k, IRAs, annuities, 403bs. You guys get the idea. Now, there's all sorts of different rules that apply to these investments. But they all, generally speaking, have 2 things in common. First thing they have in common, generally speaking, is when you put money in, you get a tax deduction. So for example, if you make $100,000 per year and you put $10,000 into your 401k, what's your new taxable income? $90,000. Second thing they have in common is the manner in which they're taxed upon distribution. And the IRS has a special word that they use to characterize this income when you take it out. What do they call this income when you take it out? That's exactly right. They call it ordinary income. So what does that mean? That means that when you put money into your 401k, all you really did was defer the receipt of that income until some point much further down the road. And when you take the money out, at what rate are you taxed? Correct. Whatever the rate happens to be in the year you take that money out. So folks, isn't that a little bit like going into a business partnership with the IRS? And every year the IRS gets to vote on what percentage of your profits they get to keep. Does that sound like a good business partnership to anyone? So you could have $1 million in your IRA, but unless you can accurately predict what tax rates are going to be in the year you take that money out, do you really know how much money you have? No. Is it hard to plan for retirement if you don't know how much money you have? Yeah. Well, some people say, don't worry, because you're going to be in a much lower tax bracket in retirement than you were during your working years. How many of you guys have heard of that before? Yeah. The question is that necessarily going to be the case? Well, this much we know. All of the deductions that you experience during your working years literally vanish into thin air right when you need them the very most, which is when? When you retire. Who can give me the number one source of deductions for the average American? That's right. Interest on your mortgage. Is your house typically paid off by the time you reach retirement? A lot of times it is. What if you're 25 years into a 30-year mortgage? Is there really all that much interest to deduct at that point? Nah, it's mostly going towards interest. So number one source of deductions is gone. What's the number two source of deductions? It's your kids. Now this is a big deal because what's a tax deduction? A tax deduction is a dollar for dollar credit, which is a dollar for dollar reduction in your tax bill. And once I figured that out, I never looked back. Are your kids still living with you in your retirement? Hopefully not, but even if they are, they're just no longer a source of tax savings. So number two source of deductions is gone. Number three is your 401k or other qualified plan. Are you still contributing to your 401k in retirement? No. The whole reason you did it is so you could take money out, not keep putting money in for the purpose of deductions. And the last one we'll talk about is charity. And what we found is that if you were charitable during your working years, you're likely to continue to be charitable in retirement. Only in retirement, there's sometimes less money to go around. So instead of donating money, what do people donate? Time. So instead of writing that check out to the soup kitchen, you may actually walk down to the soup kitchen and ladle the soup yourself, which is incredibly noble and worthwhile. But what does the IRS think about your time? They don't think about it at all. It doesn't even get added up to $60, $70, in some cases $80,000 of deductions. Absent any of these deductions in retirement, what deduction do you have left? You got what's called the standard deduction, which if you retire today, if you're younger than 65, it's $24,000. We got to update that. 24,000 should be $24,400, which if you retire today, 96,000. Okay. Anyone want to take a stab at what federal marginal tax bracket that puts you in? Yeah, that's the old 25%. With the tax cuts, it's now 22%. Okay, 22%. That's a lot. When you throw in another 6%, that puts you up to 28%, which is a lot higher than most people think. I remember a couple years ago, I was listening to a radio show, and a lady calls in. She says, I don't understand. I am making less money in retirement, but I'm paying more in taxes. How is that possible? And the radio show host says, well, tell me about your deductions. And she says, deductions? I ran out of those a long time ago. And he says, oh, I think I understand your problem. So will we necessarily be in a lower tax bracket in retirement? Not necessarily. All right. How many of you guys have read a book? A couple of you guys? Okay. How many of you guys have read a book called Catch-22. Anybody read Catch-22? Okay, in the back. Anybody remember the name of the main character? Starts with a Y. His name was Yossarian. Okay, so Yossarian was on a bombing squad in World War II. All of his buddies were also on bombing squads, and he noticed this very disturbing trend. All of his buddies would fly into battle. One by one, they get shot down, and they wouldn't come back. So he realized that if he kept on going on these bombing missions, sooner or later, he was going to be one of those guys that flew into battle and didn't come back. So he had to try to figure out a way to get out of this. So he starts to research the Air Force rules and regulations, and he comes across rule number 22. And rule number 22 says that if you can plead insanity, you can be honorably discharged from the Air Force. So what does he do? He goes up to his superior officer and he says, you know what? I can't do this job anymore because I'm going crazy. And what does the guy say? He says, there's no way you could be going crazy because this is the perfect job for crazy people. And the fact that you're trying to get out of it is actually proof that you're perfectly sane. So keep on going on those bombing missions, and that's exactly what he had to do. Why do I tell you the story? Do we still use the phrase catch-22 today? Yeah? Stuck between a rock and a hard place, darned if you do, darned if you don't. Well, you got to remember that anything in this bucket, this middle bucket, this tax-deferred bucket, is the perfect modern-day example of what we call a catch-22. Here's why. You got to remember, the IRS wants to tax you on this money so badly that at a certain point in time, they will force you to take the money out. What age is that? 70 and a half. And what do they call it? RMDs, required minimum distributions. And what happens if you choose not to or forget to take the money out? Yeah, you get an excise tax. It's 50%, 50. So let's say you're supposed to take out $10,000, chose not to or forgot to, you will get a bill in the mail for $5,000. Does that include state and federal income tax? Now throw in another 30% on the margin and you just lost 80% of what you're supposed to take out but did not. Is the IRS serious about getting their money? Yes, they're very serious. So this is the rock. This is what happens if you don't take enough money out. Well, if that's the rock, what's the hard place? Well, the hard place is what happens if you take out too much money. What happens, by the way, if you take out too much money? Yeah, you start bumping up into a higher and higher tax bracket, which means you spend your money down faster, which means you can run out faster. But there's one other thing. The IRS keeps track of something called provisional income. How many of you guys have heard of provisional income? If you haven't heard of provisional income, don't feel badly. I gave the same talk to 100 CPAs a couple years ago. I said, how many of you guys have heard of provisional income? I fully expected every hand in the room to go up. How many hands do you think went up?
Zero.
You said half, you said zero. Only two. Only two of the CPAs in the room recognize the phrase provisional. What's provisional income? That's the income the IRS keeps track of to determine if they're going to tax your Social Security. What counts as provisional income? Well, any 1099s coming out of your taxable bucket count as provisional income. Any distributions at all from your tax-deferred bucket count as provisional income. And 1/2 of your Social Security counts as provisional income. So the IRS, pardon me, so the IRS adds all this provisional income up. And if as a single person, it adds up to more than $34,000, or if as a married couple, it adds up to more than $44,000, then up to 85% of your Social Security can become taxable to you at your highest marginal tax bracket. Let me put that into perspective for you. How many of you guys studied chemistry in high school? Oh, like 3 of you? Okay. How many of you guys remember that long, skinny cylinder with the red lines on it? What do we call that? Graduated cylinder. That's exactly right. The other day we had a guy say, oh, that's a bong. I said, no. I think that's something totally different. Anyway, the reason I tell you this is because our tax system in our country works exactly like a graduated cylinder. Your money goes in, goes all the way down to the bottom. Some of your money gets taxed at 10, some at 12, some at 22, some at 24, some at 32, some at 35, and some at 37%. So to give you an idea on this, even Bill Gates has some of his earned income taxed at only 10%. if only for about 3 seconds, right? And then he moves rapidly to the top, and most of his earned income gets taxed right there. So let's say that because of your distributions from this bucket, you are in the 22% tax bracket. Let's also say that you were planning on getting $25,000 of Social Security. Well, the IRS is going to say, hey, before we let you keep all that Social Security, we got to do one additional calculation. Because of your high levels of provisional income, they are now going to take 85% of that $25,000, which is about $21,000, and they're going to stuff that into your cylinder. And it's going to land right on top of all your other income, at which point you get to pay tax of 22% on $21,000. What's 22% of $21,000? It's $4,620. So guess what? Because you took too much money out of your IRA or 401k, you now have a $4,620 hole in your Social Security. How do you think most Americans go about plugging that hole? Taking more money out of their IRAs and 401ks. So here's a math question for you. If tax rates went up to 50%, like David Walker's calling for, how much money, let me say, as David Walker predicted would need to happen to keep our country solvent, how much money would you have to take out of your IRA, pay that 50% tax to the IRS, and then be left over with $4,620 with which you can then plug the hole in your Social Security? What's double 4620? 9240, $9,240. Folks, why do I even bring this stuff up? I bring it up because I've done the math 100 times in 100 different ways on 100 different clients, and this is what I've concluded. I've concluded that when your Social Security gets taxed, you run out of money 5 to 7 years faster than people who do not have their Social Security taxed. Why? Because the act of compensating for Social Security taxation forces you to spend down all your other assets that much faster. All right, everybody pretty much in a good mood by now? Let's talk about a third bucket. Third bucket has all sorts of different names. Some people call it tax advanced, some call it tax preferred, some call it tax exempt. Me, I like to call it tax free. I just like the way it rolls off my tongue. Now, I got to warn you, there's all sorts of different investments out there that masquerade as tax free. But I'm here to tell you, to be truly tax free, it's got to qualify in 2 different ways. The first way is it's got to really be tax free. And when I'm talking tax free, I'm talking free from 3 different types of investments. Free from federal tax, free from state tax, and free from capital gains tax. Now, how many of you guys have heard of municipal bonds? Okay. Are municipal bonds truly tax-free? Now let's take a look at it. Are they free from federal tax? Yes. They actually are free from federal tax. Are they free from state tax? Sometimes. Now let's say I live in Wisconsin. If I were to buy a municipal bond from Illinois, don't know why I would. You guys hear about the guy from Illinois he won the lottery and they had to write him an IOU. It's a true story. You heard that story? Yeah, it's a true story. So if I were to buy a municipal bond from Illinois, would the state of Wisconsin give me a tax break for that? No, because I'm not benefiting the municipality in which I live. And let's say I don't want to put all my eggs in one basket, so I buy a mutual fund of municipal bonds, and that mutual fund appreciates in value, and I sell it at a gain. Will I pay capital gains tax on that mutual fund? Yes, I will. So like I told you, an investment that we've been told for years and years and years is tax-free doesn't even meet our first basic test. The second thing I'm looking for in a true tax-free investment is no Social Security tax. In other words, when you take distributions from a true tax-free investment, it should not count as provisional income. It should not count against the thresholds which cause Social Security taxation. By the way, when you take interest off your municipal bonds, does that count as provisional income? Yes, it sure does. So like I told you, an investment that we've been told for years and years and years is double tax-free, triple tax-free, doesn't meet either of our 2 basic tests. All right, so now that we know that this bucket exists, What we're going to do in the balance of our time is I'm simply going to give you an example. I'm simply going to give you a scenario. Now, the one thing I can guarantee is that this example is not going to apply perfectly to all of your clients, but I can guarantee one thing, that there will be something in this example that applies to just about every one of your clients, so I want you to watch out for it. So the example I'm going to give you is Mr. and Mrs. Jones, both age 50. Between the two of them, they make $100,000 per year. They want to retire at age 65. Now remember, we got our three buckets up here. What are the names of our three buckets again? Taxable, tax-deferred, and tax-free. Very good. Now let's say that these folks, between the two of them, they got $500,000 in their cumulative IRAs. They got $100,000 in their plain old taxable mutual funds over here in their taxable bucket. That's their emergency fund. They're putting 10% into their 401k. They're getting no match. They're getting no free money. And they're contributing $2,000 per year to some term life insurance, and they're contemplating getting some long-term care insurance for $4,000 per year. Now, if this couple were to walk into a traditional tax-deferred paradigm financial advisor's office, how would the conversation go? Well, just so happens, I've been training traditional tax-deferred financial advisors for the last 15 years of my life. And in the act of doing so, I have sat in their offices. And I've listened to them as they've spoken to people like this for the very first time. And here's how the conversation goes. Mr. and Mrs. Jones, congratulations. They always congratulate you, by the way. That's a great IRA. The problem is, last year down the road, when you were at XYZ company, you only earned 7%. We think we can get you 8%. So roll all that money over to us. As far as your mutual funds, that's a great emergency fund. Problem is, last year down the road, you only got 3%. We think we can get you 5%. Let us manage that for you as well. As far as your 401k with no match goes, keep on doing it. When you switch jobs, give me a call. We'll roll the 401k into that IRA, get everything under one roof, maybe save you some break points, save you some fees. And as far as your term life insurance and that long-term care insurance you're contemplating, gosh, you know, not really what we do, but who are we to say you shouldn't keep doing it? And that is a conversation that I've heard literally dozens and dozens of times. Well, when someone like that walks into my office, I see red flags all over the place. For example, I'm not so much concerned with what's in that IRA today. What keeps me awake at night is what this IRA is going to be worth 15 years from now if it grows at 8% per year. What's this IRA going to be worth 15 years from now if it grows at 8% per year? What do you guys think? Great guess. How many of you guys have heard of the rule of 72? Yeah, the rule of 72 says take the rate of growth, divide it into 72. That tells you how many years till the asset doubles. When we divide 8 into 72, that tells us in 9 years that 500 is worth $1 million. 6 years later, in the 15th year, it's now worth $1.6 million. So here's my question for you. What's wrong with having $1.6 million in your tax-deferred bucket? I know it sounds great, but what's wrong with it?
The government's got a big pile of money.
That's right. You haven't paid taxes on any of it yet. In fact, required minimum distributions alone on $1.6 million will put you in one of the higher marginal tax brackets and literally guarantee that your Social Security will be taxable in perpetuity with all of the compensating spend down that goes along with it. So what we want to do is we want to prevent that IRA from ever getting to $1.6 million. So here's my question for you. How do you prevent an IRA from growing? And don't anyone say, put it in the stock market. Usually at this point, someone will say, let's do a Roth conversion. How many of you guys have heard of a Roth conversion? Okay. A Roth conversion basically says that if you have money in your tax-deferred bucket in the form of an IRA, you can shift it to tax-free so long as you pay what along the way? Taxes at what rate? Happens to be in the year you make that conversion. So let's say they do it all in 1 year. They do a $500,000 conversion. They pay 40% tax. How much tax are they going to owe on that Roth conversion? $200,000. So here's my question for you. Do Mr. and Mrs. Jones here have $200,000 just lying around that they can earmark for that tax bill? No, they don't have it. So some people say that's okay. They don't need to have it because they can just have the IRS withhold the tax from the conversion itself. What would happen if they did that as a 50-year-old? they would get a 10% penalty. The IRS says even if you take the money out and give it right back to the IRS in the form of a tax, if you're younger than 59 and a half, they will give you a 10% penalty. So guess what? Unless you got a lot of money just languishing in your taxable bucket that you would happily earmark towards a tax on that Roth conversion, I would probably wait until you're 59 and a half before you start doing Roth conversions. So the question becomes, is there any other way to get money out of that IRA pre-59 and a half without penalty? Well, at this point, I may bring up that little known section of the IRS tax code. It's section 72, subsection T. In our industry, we call it a 72T. And a 72T says that you can take money out of your IRA pre-59 and a half without penalty, so long as you do it in separate, equal yearly distributions that last for at least 5 years or until 59 and a half, whichever is longer. These days, by way of a 72T, a couple of 50-year-olds could take out about 5% per year. So we take 5% out of that IRA and shift it to tax-free. What's 5% of 500,000? $25,000. We can shift it to tax-free. By the way, if we want to, we can pay the tax on that 72T right out of the $25,000 itself. No problem. All right, let's take a look at these mutual funds. How do we feel about their mutual funds? Do they have too much or too little in their if this is their emergency fund, do they have too much or too little in their emergency fund? They got too much. If they're making $100,000 per year, how much should they have in their emergency fund? Probably closer to 50. So not only do they have too much, but they're growing into mutual funds, which means the problem's getting bigger every year. So what we want to do is we want to take the growth on that mutual fund, plus some of the principal, shift it from there to there, taxable to tax-free, little by little, year by year, such that by the time they reach 65, they got the perfect amount. I've done the math on this. That would require an annual shift of $6,000 per year. How do we feel about 401ks that don't have matches? Should we do them? Folks, this is the this is the one thing that Susie Orman, Dave Ramsey, and Clark Howard actually agree upon. The rule of thumb when it comes to 401ks is you put in up to the match, but not 1 penny above and beyond. You do whatever's required to get the free money, and then you move on to the next best thing. Well, if these folks are trying to prevent their IRA from growing by doing a 72T, yet they're putting money hand over fist into their 401k, and they're getting no free money, are those two strategies at odds with each other? Yes. That's a conflicted strategy. So what we want to do is we want to recapture that 10%. What's 10% of 100,000? $10,000, and we want to shift that to tax-free. How do we feel about term life insurance and long-term care insurance? Well, we feel like it's incredibly important to mitigate both of these risks, either one of which can really upset your financial apple cart in the years leading up to retirement and retirement. We feel like sometimes, not always, sometimes there can be a better way to accomplish that. So we may recapture that $6,000 as well. So how much total money did we free up on an annual basis to be able to reposition to tax-free? What does that all add up to? $47,000. Now, usually at this point, someone will say, hey, Dave, not so fast. You don't really have $47,000 freed up. And I'll say, why not? And they'll say, because some of those recommendations that you made are actually taxable events. Are they right? Yeah. The 72T is a taxable event, and when you put less money into your 401k, that increases your taxable income, so that's also a taxable event. So because of this strategy, we just realized $35,000 of additional taxable income. Let's call it a 30% tax rate just to make our math easy. That's $10,500 of additional taxation every year we use this strategy. Now let me ask you this, do Mr. and Mrs. Jones have $10,500 just lying around that they would love to earmark for this tax bill? That they would love to earmark for this tax bill. Not that they would love. And if we say, quit going out to eat, quit going on vacation, pull back the belt a couple of notches just so you can pay that tax bill, will they return my phone calls? Probably not. So we got to find a way to help them pay that tax bill such that we are not encroaching on their lifestyle. So what I may recommend is that they simply pay for right out of the $47,000 we just freed up, which means we really have $36,500 left each and every year that we can reposition to tax-free. So folks, this is where the rubber hits the road. Where can we put $36,500 per year such that it can grow in a truly tax-free way? Well, at this point, I'm going to recommend that they fully fund one of my very favorite tax-free investments, and that's what we call a Roth IRA. How much money, by the way, Okay, I got my old numbers in here. How much money can you put into a Roth IRA these days? 7,000 each for a total of 14,000 per year. So ignore this number right here. That's last year's number. Why do I love Roth IRAs? I love Roth IRAs because Roth IRAs are truly tax-free. So long as you're 59 and a half when you take the money out, you don't pay any of those taxes we talked about. And when you take money out of a Roth IRA, it does not count as provisional income. It does not count against the thresholds which cause Social Security taxation. Roth IRAs are truly tax-free. By the way, when I say Roth IRAs, I'm talking any investment with the word Roth in front of it. It could be a Roth 401k. It could be a traditional Roth IRA. It could be a Roth conversion. If it has the word Roth in it, it is truly tax-free. Well, that leaves us, let's just work with this $6,500 number. That leaves us with $23,500 left per year. Where can we put $23,500 per year such that it grows in a truly tax-free way? Well, at this point, I may bring up a bucket of money that is treated differently for tax purposes than anything else we've talked about so far. And what happens with this bucket is you put money in, and as your money grows, your bucket begins to fill. Only the IRS says that the growth on the money in this bucket is going to be treated under a different section of the IRS tax code than anything else we've talked about so far. What does that section of the IRS tax code say? It says that you can touch this money pre-59 and a half with no penalty. Can you do that in your IRA or 401k? No, you cannot. They're going to tell you that as your money grows, you receive no 1099s. What does that mean? No tax as it grows. They're going to tell you that if you take the money out, and you take it out the right way, it does not show up as reportable income on your tax return. What does that mean? It means it's tax-free and does not count as provisional income. They're also going to tell you that there are no contribution limits. What did we say were the contribution limits for the Roth IRA? 7,000 each for a total of 14,000. Folks, I got clients that do 50 bucks a month, and I got clients that do $200,000 per year, and everywhere in between. There are no limits on how much you can put into your into this bucket. They're also going to tell you that there are no income limitations. Let me ask you this: can Bill Gates do a Roth IRA? Bill Gates can do a Roth conversion, but can he do a Roth IRA? He cannot do a Roth IRA. How come? He makes too much money. You start making north of $203,000 of modified adjusted gross income, you can no longer do a Roth IRA. Can my children, the youngest of whom is 4, do Roth IRAs? In order to do a Roth IRA, you have to have earned income. My kids work. I just don't pay them. If you are retired, drawing money from Social Security, a pension, and taking RMDs from your IRA, can you do a Roth IRA? Can do a Roth conversion, but you can't do a Roth IRA. They're two separate things. None of those rules apply to this particular bucket. And they're also going to tell you that if history serves as a model, there may be no legislative risk. What do you think I mean by no legislative risk? That maybe they can't change the rules on it somewhere down the road. Let me give you an example. How many of you guys have been, pardon me, how many of you guys have been to Cedarburg, Wisconsin? There's always one person in every room. Where are you? Okay, so today it's me. So I've got a client in Cedarburg, Wisconsin. In 1963, he signed up for the Wisconsin State Teacher Pension Plan. And one of the inducements was they said, hey, if you sign up for this pension, we are going to give it to you in retirement, state tax-free. He says, that sounds great. I'm in. So he signs up. Well, guess what? The very next year, they changed the rule. 1964, they said, now we will tax these pensions at the state level in retirement. Well, fast forward 30 years, he gets his first Wisconsin state teacher pension check. Do they take out state tax? They do not. What do we call that kind of a clause? A grandfather clause. Well, guess what? They changed the rules on this bucket 3 different times, in 82, 84, and 88. And every single time they changed the rule, they simply said, whoever has the bucket before the rule changes gets to keep it and continue to put money into it under the old rule for the rest of their lives. We call it a grandfather clause. We actually have NAIFA to thank for a lot of these grandfather clauses that we get and the continued protection of these types of vehicles. So usually at this point, someone will say, gosh, Dave, this is like the alignment of the stars. This is like the perfect investment. Why not just put all my money into there? Well, guess what? Is it ever a good idea to put all your not only that, but the IRS says if we're going to give you the benefit of an unlimited bucket of tax-free dollars, we're going to require that there be a cost of admission. We're going to require that there be a spigot attached to the side of the bucket through which flows on a monthly basis some expenses. What do those expenses go towards? They go towards some administrative fees, but they primarily go towards the cost of term life insurance. Now let me ask you this. If your house is paid off, your kids have moved out, and you're rapidly approaching retirement, is term life insurance really all that high on your wish list? No. It's usually right about now that people start dumping their term life insurance, and the companies that sponsor these programs recognize that, so they've done something to sweeten the pot. They simply say that in the event that somewhere down the road you should need long-term care or have what we call a chronic illness, they will give you your death benefit while you're alive for the purpose of paying for it. Let me give you an example. Let's say you get a death benefit of $400,000. You wake up one day, you can no longer feed yourself, bathe yourself, transfer yourself, what have you. Any two of 6 activities of daily living. You can find one doctor to write one letter to that effect. They will start sending you 25% of that death benefit, or $100,000 per year, every year for 4 years, for the purpose of paying for long-term care. Now, they may discount that number slightly based on the year or the age in which you received the benefit, but the point is this: they're willing to give you your death benefit while you're alive for the purpose of paying for long-term care. Let me ask you this. How many of you guys have looked into traditional long-term care insurance? Okay. Is it cheap? No, it's getting more expensive all the time, right? Can it be hard to qualify? Yeah, you might live to be 120, but if you have a bad back, a bad hip, a bad knee, you may not even get accepted. And what happens if you pay for 30 years and die peaceful in your sleep, never having used it? Do they send you all your money back at the end? No, it goes to pay for someone else's benefit. And that can be a source of heartburn for a lot of different people, because nobody wants to pay for something they hope they never have to use, right? Well, why is this different? This is different because if you die peaceful in your sleep 30 years from now, never having needed long-term care, guess what? Someone's still getting a death benefit. So there isn't that sensation of having paid for something you hope you never have to use. By the way, has this couple, this very couple we've been talking about, have they already bought off on the idea that they need term insurance and long-term care? Yeah, they've already budgeted for it. All we're suggesting is maybe, instead of sending that money off to an insurance company in the form of a premium payment, why not recapture it, direct it to this bucket, let a portion of it drip out in the form of expenses, and now take advantage of a huge bucket of tax-free dollars that wasn't previously available to you. By the way, what do I call this bucket? I call it an LIRP. What does that stand for? Stands for, it's actually chapter 5 of my book. LIRP stands for Life Insurance Retirement Plan. Why life insurance? Because the IRS says in order for this bucket to work, you got to be willing to pay for some life insurance. You got to insurance. Why retirement plan? Because one of the ancillary goals of this bucket is to build money up so that somewhere down the road you can take money out and spend it on your lifestyle at a period in time when tax rates are likely to be dramatically higher than they are today. All right, before we go any further, I got a very important question to ask, and it's this. If you could be in any tax bracket of your choosing in retirement, which tax bracket would you choose? Hi, Heather. Now, Heather, not to put you on the spot, but when I had my graduated cylinder up there, did you see 0 anywhere on there? No? Okay, folks. Heather wants to be in a tax bracket that clearly does not exist. Well, if what Heather wants is to be in a 0% tax bracket, tell me how we're doing so far. This couple, this very couple we've been talking about, Mr. and Mrs. Jones, they're going to have money coming out of their Roth IRAs. So long as they're 59.5 when they take the money out, will they pay tax? No tax. They're going to have a lot of money coming out of their LIRP. Regardless of how old they are when they take the money out, will they pay tax? No tax. Now let's go back to that IRA. You guys remember that IRA? Our goal in doing the 72T was simply to prevent that IRA from getting any bigger. If we did a good job of preventing that IRA from getting any bigger, how much money should still be in that IRA by the time they reach 65? $500,000, 500,000. So the question becomes, if at age 65 they have $500,000 in their IRA, is there any way to get money out of that, spend it on their lifestyle, not pay tax, and it's got to be legal? Is there any way to do that? Remember what we said. If you retire today, absent any other deductions, the IRS gives you a deduction. What do we call that deduction? Standard deduction. We're going to have to run with this old number here. So pretend it's 2018, $24,000. Does that number index with inflation? Yes, historically they've increased that. You may have closer to $37,400 worth of deductions. Here's my question for you. If at age 65 you have $37,400 worth of deductions, how much could you take out of that IRA without paying any tax at all? $37,400. By the way, if we had let this IRA grow in an unbridled sort of a way, and it hit 1.6 million, would required minimum distributions alone on 1.6 million be greater than $37,400? Yes. Could they be in a 0% tax bracket at that point? No. What's the moral of the story? The moral story, when you let your tax-deferred investments grow in an unbridled sort of a way, you can close the door of possibility to ever being in the 0% tax bracket, and you can open the door of possibility to being exposed to the ebb and flow of tax rates over time. By the way, if we have no tax, what do you suppose happens to their Social Security? No tax. And if you have no tax, what tax bracket does that put you in? 0%. Can we give Heather a hand here? Now, why do I make such a big deal about being in the 0% tax bracket? Well, if we cannot get you to the 0% tax bracket, what's the next best tax bracket? And don't anyone say 1? 10. Throw in another 6% for state. Now we're talking 16. And if what David Walker says comes true and tax rates have to double to keep our country solvent over time, what happens to the 16? 32. All of a sudden, second place isn't looking all that great. Now, I love it when things make sense conceptually, but I love it even more when things make sense mathematically. So what I did for these folks is I did what's called a before and after comparison. How many of you guys have seen the before and after diet photos? Before, after. Well, did you know you can do the exact same thing with your retirement projection? So what we did for these folks is we said, hey, if these folks never met me and they kept on doing exactly what they were doing and they didn't change a thing and tax rates somehow managed to stay at only 30% for the rest of their lives, how much money would they be able to spend after tax? And according to my math, they'd be able to spend just shy of $4.5 million after tax. I know what you're thinking. That sounds like a lot of money. It is a lot of money. The problem is they run out of money at age 85, at which point they can either die or move in with their kids. And most people would rather? Okay. Conversely, if they did everything we talked about, we get them to 0% tax, get them to the 0% tax bracket, get their Social Security tax-free, stir in a little LIRP, guess what? They can now take out almost $8 million. They never run out of money, and they still have 1.4 million left over at age 100. More importantly, what happens to the gray column if tax rates double? Does it get bigger or smaller? It gets smaller. What happens to the blue column if tax rates double? It stays exactly the same. Why? Because if you're in the 0% tax bracket and tax rates double, what's 2 times 0? 0. So the only way to truly insulate yourself from the impact of higher taxes is to get to the 0% tax bracket. Why? Because if tax rates double, 2 times 0 is still 0. Folks, that's the power of 0. All right. Before we go any further, I usually get 3 different questions. Either these are far and away the top 3 questions I get. The number 1 question I get is this: am I too old to get to the 0% tax bracket? That's the number 1 question that I get. And I usually respond to that question in the following way. Doug Orchard and I the fiscal what would have to happen to tax years in the next 10 years to keep our country solvent? And this is what they had to say.
The truth is the federal government has lost control of the budget.
Instead of paying for all the new initiatives, whether they're tax cuts, spending increases, all sorts of things that we like, the government's just putting it all on the national credit card. And as a result, our national debt is just going up and up and up. And it's growing faster than the economy. And that's when you know you have a real problem.
Everything is going to be squeezed out of the budget. There won't be anything left.
The road we're on is a perilous one that ultimately leads to the bankrupting of our country.
So we have a crisis on our hands.
All Congress has to do for this whole situation to come to a head is nothing. Because every year that they do nothing makes the problem even more unsolvable.
We don't seem to have the ability to get along and find common ground.
Is the government trying to trick you right now? And the answer is very simply yes.
So why is this being swept under the rug? Why is nobody talking about it? So I've actually been traveling around the country for about 4 years now, taking the power of zero message to different groups.
When you cut taxes on current generations, you are simultaneously raising them on future generations.
It is all driven by spending. Once we have spent a dollar, we've already decided to tax it. The only question is whether we tax it now or we borrow it now and tax it in the future.
So to make up for the liabilities that we're incurring with all the promises we've made in social insurance programs, we're going to have to increase substantially the tax rate and perhaps even double it.
Now, precisely how high it's going to be, there's a lot of room to debate, but people will have to pay more taxes.
People's retirement savings are at risk of future higher taxes.
Well, qualified plans really do two things. They defer the tax and the tax calculation. Now let that run past your brain real slow.
I'm driven by trying to help as many people as I can avoid this disaster that's going to come up in retirement when taxes go up and the market goes down. What are these people going to do if they haven't planned ahead of time?
Are reading the same music and they're singing the same song. What are they saying? They're saying that if we don't shift course dramatically as a country starting this year, that 10 years from now tax rates will have to rise dramatically to keep our country. What's the D word? What's the D word? Tax rates would have to double. So the real question is not, are you too old to get to the 0% tax bracket? The real question should be, if 2029 rolls around and tax rates double, will you look back at the year 2019 and say, why did we not take advantage of tax rates while they were historically low? Because all tax rates have to do in the future is go up by 1% for the math here to make sense. So the real question you should be asking yourself is, will you be alive 10 years from now? Because if you are, the math here really pushes you further ahead. The second question I get is, can I be in the 0% tax bracket and still be a good person? After all, if we're all in the 0% tax bracket, who's going to pay for the roads? Who's going to pay for the schools? Who's going to pay for the social programs? Well, first of all, are we suggesting that Mr. and Mrs. Jones here not pay tax? No. The cost of getting to the 0% tax bracket is you got to be willing to pay a tax. We're simply suggesting that when given the choice between paying taxes at today's historically low tax rates or postponing the payment of those taxes till some point much further down the road, you're probably better off paying them today. At hand, his most famous judge to never become a Supreme Court justice. This is what he had to say about it. He says, anyone may arrange his affairs so that his taxes shall be as low as possible. He is not bound to choose that pattern which best pays the Treasury. There is not even a patriotic duty to increase one's taxes. Over and over again, the courts have said there is nothing sinister in so arranging affairs as to keep taxes as low as possible. Everyone does it, rich and poor alike, and all do right, for nobody owes any public duty to pay more than the law demands. So can you be in a 0% tax bracket and still be a good person? You bet you can. The last question I get is, how come I've never heard of this stuff before? Well, I would submit that your clients have heard of just about everything up here. The only thing that's maybe not quite in this combination, the only thing that's new for people is this idea of the LIRP. And all we're trying to do with the LIRP is the opposite of what most people do when it comes to life insurance. What do most people do when it comes to life insurance? They get as much death benefit as they can for as little money as possible. What do we call that? Term insurance. Here we're doing just the opposite. We're getting as little insurance as the IRS requires of us, and we're stuffing as much money into it as the IRS allows in an attempt to mimic all of the tax-free benefits of the Roth IRA without any of the limitations. Why else haven't you heard about this? Well, you got to ask yourself how most major money management institutions make money. How do major money management institutions make money? They charge you a fee. What's a typical fee? call it 1%. Let's say they're managing $1 million of your dollars in the tax deferred bucket. They're charging you 1%. How much are they making off you per year? $10,000. If they were to persuade you tax rates in the future are likely to be dramatically higher than they are today, then you might just feel impressed to shift that money to tax-free. And when you shift it to tax-free, what are you going to have to pay along the way? Tax. Let's call it 30%. So you now have $700,000 in your tax-free bucket. If they're still charging you 1%, how much are they making off you per year now? $7,000. Didn't they just experience a pay cut for persuading you that tax rates in the future are likely to be dramatically higher than they are today? And for that reason alone, most major money management institutions don't want to touch this conversation with a 10-foot pole. In fact, they forbid their advisors from even bringing it up. Me personally, I don't care how much money you have. The only thing that matters to me is how much you actually get to spend after tax. That's the only number that really matters. All right. So for those of you who are taking notes, I got a couple of takeaways for you. Takeaway number one, tax rates in the future are likely to be dramatically higher than they are today. Mathematically speaking, there's just no way around it. We're just too late in the game to have any other solution. Takeaway number two, the only way to truly insulate yourself from the impact of higher taxes is to get to the 0% tax bracket. Why? Because if you're in the 0% tax bracket and tax rates double, what's 2 times 0? 0. Takeaway number three, I've been doing this for over 20 years. I put thousands of people on the road to the 0% tax bracket, and I noticed something very interesting. It is nearly impossible to get to the 0% tax bracket by relying on just one stream of tax-free income. For example, it's nearly impossible to get to the 0% tax bracket by relying on just the Roth IRA. It is nearly impossible to get to the 0% tax bracket by relying on, for example, just the LIRP. To get to the 0% tax bracket typically requires 5 or 6 different streams of tax-free income, none of which show up on the IRS's radar, and all of which contribute to you being in the 0% tax bracket. Takeaway number 4. Oh, I jumped over takeaway number 4. Takeaway number 4 is it used to be that people would ask me, they'd say, hey, Dave, when are tax rates going to go up? And I'd say, you know, I used to say, in some distant unknowable future, maybe 10 years out, tax rates are likely to go higher. Well, guess what? We now know the year and the day when tax rates will go up, January 1st, 2026. And every year between now and then represents a little mini window of opportunity during which to take advantage of historically low tax rates. And every year that goes by where your clients fail to take advantage of historically low tax rates is potentially a year beyond 2026 where they could be forced to pay taxes at the highest rates they're likely to see in their lifetime. Takeaway number 5. You know, a couple months ago, a lady came up to me and she says, hey, Dave, thanks a lot. I said, what'd I do? She goes, now I'm in a really bad mood. And I said, well, why would you be in a bad mood? And she goes, because I got all my money in the tax-deferred bucket. I said, let me get this straight. You put money into your tax-deferred bucket at a period in time when tax rates were higher than they are today. You got a tax deduction at that higher 7-year period during which to take advantage of historically low tax rates to get that tax-deferred bucket repositioned to tax-free so that by the time tax rates potentially double over time, you've done all the heavy lifting and you can take that money out tax-free. I said, is that what's got you in such a bad mood? She says, oh, well, Dave, I guess if you put it that way. So, guess what? Your clients have control over how this story ends. So long as they're taking advantage of the tax rates at historically low levels for the next 7 years, then this story can end in an incredibly tax-free way. There's one other question I get, especially from advisors. They say, hey, Dave, how am I supposed to bottle up this message and unleash it on my clients? They say, this is a really important message. By the way, can we agree that this is an important message? Yes. Yeah. They say, how am I supposed to bottle this up and unleash it on my clients? And I say, well, there's 2 ways you could do it. Maybe I could email you the script for this presentation. It's only 52 pages long, single-space typewritten, and you can memorize it and then take it into your client's living room and give maybe an easier way. I wrote a book called The Power of Zero. How many? 0. Okay, so for those of you who have read The Power of Zero, does it follow this presentation pretty closely? Yes. This is the book version of this presentation. How long do you think it took me to write this presentation or to write this book? About 2 pages. I just regurgitated the presentation onto paper. Boom, I got a book. So that's the power of zero. And what I recommend that you do is you say, hey, take this book. You send it out to a client, say, Mr. and Mrs. Jones, the other day I was reading this book. As I was reading this book, I couldn't stop thinking about your situation. Do me a favor, read the book. I'll call back in a week. Let me know what you think. Does that sound like a tough conversation to have? There's actually a farmer's agent by the name of Jeff Anuto out of Vegas. The most premium he'd ever done in a year is $40,000. He decided to take my invitation seriously. He sent it out to his clients with that exact same dialogue. And the first full year that he did that, he did $365,000 of premium. He did so well, he ended up as #1 in the company. He decided to do that a second year, ended up #1 for 2 years in a row. I had another guy at the Elite at Slot IRA Advisor Conference come up to me and said, he just hugged me. I said, what'd I do? He said, Dave, I've been handing your book out for 8 months. I've done $1 million of premium. Now, the flip side is also true. A guy from Colorado comes up to me and goes, Dave, I handed out 40 copies of your book. I didn't sell a single policy. I said, did you follow up with them? He goes, I didn't know that I had to. So if you get my books, I would recommend that if you send them out that you do follow up. So I've actually got 3 books. Power of Zero, that's the one that sold over 200,000 copies. Look Before You LERP is the sequel to The Power of Zero. And if you want to know how all of this can apply to your clients under 50, then The Volatility Shield is my latest book. And you can go to powerofzero.com/books to get all of those books. Just a little bit more information. If you want to learn how to transition your practice to a Power of Zero practice, if you're here today, just give me your business card. I'll opt you into a free video series that will teach you how to do that. Or you can go to powerofzero.com and opt into it. A couple other things. If you want to follow me on Twitter, McKnight & Co. is my handle. I have a podcast. We've been doing an episode a week for the last year. That's the powerofzeroshow.com, or sorry, the Power of Zero Show. You can get that on iTunes or pretty much anywhere podcasts are. Again, that video series is at powerofzero.com. And if you want to get copies of our documentary, go to powerofzero.com/movie. Other than that, you guys have been a really, really terrific group. Thank you so much.
David, thank you very much. We wanted to give David full time today, so we did not allow for questions from our live audience. So if you do have questions and you're at a watch site, give that to your moderator or send in your polling question, and we'll get those to David and respond to everyone. Take a couple moments if you're at a watch party, have a discussion about how this can impact your business. Make sure you write down the names of clients you've thought about it as he was going through your presentation and reach out to them. Make sure that you take advantage of the information that was given to you. So with that, we're going to turn it back to Zach and Falls Church. Zach.
Well, thank you so much, Brad. And once again, thank you, David. And thanks to all who have participated in today's NAIFA Live. And now we are going to move on to our second and final polling questions for the individual viewers out there. So the second polling question is, how many years have you been in the business? And I'll repeat that as I pull this question up for you all. How many years have you been in the business? Please use the polling function on your screen to respond or type your answer in chat. You have 2 minutes. Now, don't forget to mark your calendar for the next meeting on November 21st, hosted by NAIFA's Limited and Extended Care Planning Center and featuring Carol Golden, presenting Understanding the Broadening Options for Extended and Long-Term Care Planning. For those of you who have joined us virtually, this concludes our program. For those who are participating from area viewing locations, we turn you back to your local meeting and encourage you to continue the discussion. Have a great day, everyone.